Allison. It's so good to see you.
Oh my gosh, we're so excited about this book club.
Thank you. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, we're so excited. I'm joining from Denver. I'm in a hotel room.
I was going to say, it looks sunny there.
Yes, it is an hour earlier, so I'm all day
That's
long. I
great.
kept having to remind myself this is at 6 o'clock, not at 7. So
Yes, it's so true.
Yeah, I've been talking to people on so many different time zones. I had to confirm. I was like, okay, I'm in the same time zone as Waco.
oh
Yes.
good. No, where are you in Chicago?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so cool. Are you actually getting fall weather? I assume so.
Sort of. Yeah, it's been like low 70s, which is just beautiful.
Oh,
Sunny,
yeah.
low 70s. Yeah. I'm guessing it's warm where you are, Allison.
It is. It is, I think it's kind of like when you're in a classroom and everyone's passing out papers and you don't get one and the teacher starts talking. I feel that way about fall, like where Mother Nature's get everybody fall, but we're like, no, we want it as well. So
What
it's
about me?
I know I've been wearing my summer clothes because it's ridiculous and trying to have fall colors.
Everyone's talking about spooky season, and you're like, well, yeah,
Oh, I
feels
know. I know. My kids have before like been sweating out of their Halloween costumes. It's just
Yeah,
ridiculous.
you never know.
Yes, it's so true. Well, so glad to have you. Now, you guys met face to face, Elizabeth and Caroline, or
Nope,
no? You just know each other through Instagram. I couldn't remember.
we're Insta buddies.
Love it.
nice.
That's awesome. Well, I'm gonna kind of give we're a little early, but I'll give a little introduction as far as like how we do things at Fabled Book Club. So, Caroline, the great thing about this is spoilers abound. We get to talk about the ending. We get to
Oh,
ask
great.
you about things. I mean, it's so fun whenever we tell authors that. They're like, "Are you serious?" Like, because I'm
Yeah.
sure they're used to holding things in on their, press junkets of like, "Oh, I can't mention that yet." But we get to ask everything. So I always like to warn everyone. So if you're here and you've not finished the book, we will send you a recorded version of this Zoom tomorrow. 24 hours later, you'll receive it in your email and you can wait to finish it. I strongly encourage you. It's so good. And then you can watch it. So fair warning, spoilers abound, first of all.
I love that.
Yes,
And you can find it on YouTube later. So that helps too if you
totally.
want to have access to that, Caroline.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, I'm so glad that anybody can watch it at any time.
Yes.
We also, if there's anyone who has any questions or for either about the book or for Caroline, feel free to put it in the chat. You can also put it on the Q&A. We will get to it as we go through our own questions. It's always fun when people have questions that we haven't thought of, where sometimes Elizabeth and I feel like, okay, we have plenty. And then someone else thinks of like other amazing questions too. So please, if you have anything, please put it in there because we are delighted when that's done. And then at the end of our discussion, we will introduce our next pick for November for a book club. So you will definitely want to stick around. And Caroline, we'll let you stick around as well. So you can, if you need a book option for yourself, we will announce that at the end of this Zoom.
I can't wait to hear.
Yes. Elizabeth picks them and she does such a good job. Such a good job.
You're so sweet.
This one, I'm being honest, I'm not being sweet. This one, I was like texting her and I was like, oh my gosh, I love this one so much. Truly.
Well, and at first I picked this book. We have to do it for book club. There's a serial killer in it, and Allison's like,
I'm
okay.
like, oh yay.
Yeah. But I did get a text on my way to Denver that you loved it. And I was like, oh, that always makes me so happy to hear that.
Yes.
And I've heard that a few people have shied away because of the serial killer. And I'm like, you'll be fine.
Yes.
No,
yes.
you're fine.
It's not like Silence of the Lambs.
I feel like it's serial killer light. If
Yes.
that has helped, like you're not gonna
It's
be
cozy
banged out.
serial killer.
Yes. Elizabeth and I have differing versions of like what is we consider violent in a book. And so we learned that. And so sometimes she'll be like,
This-
"It's fine." And I'm like, that was so disturbing. Whatever we read, I don't remember. But I was like, okay, we need, just so you know, that's a little more violent than maybe everybody, can handle. But anyways.
Yeah.
So, we've got a few here already. I do want to say that we are thinking and praying for anybody in the hurricane's path, both last week and this week. Truly, truly, I'm praying for everyone in that. So Elizabeth, I'm going to let you formally introduce Caroline and give maybe a book. Caroline, if you give just a little book synopsis after she does, that'll be great. And we'll start with our questions.
All right, so we are thrilled to have Caroline with us tonight. Caroline Woods holds an MFA in fiction from Boston University. She is the author of the novels The Lunar Housewife and Fraulein M. And she has taught fiction writing at Loyola University, Chicago, Boston University, and the Boston Conservatory. Raised in Delaware, she now lives near Chicago with her husband and 2 daughters. So I will have to say, every year I take an annual trip to Cape Cod, and I have this special, it's always like, which books am I going to bring on the trip? And I read several in a row and they were just forgettable. And I opened this book and could not put it down. Nothing happened until I finished this book. So I messaged you, I know, Caroline, about it and told everyone at the store we were definitely going to pick this for one of our biggest subscription box. And I do think you have the distinct honor of being the only author where we have had 2 of your books for our subscription boxes. So we picked The Lunar Housewife, yes, The Lunar Housewife for, I guess, last year or when it came out. So we're apparently Fabled really loves how you write books. So I'm just thrilled to tell you that. And I would love to kind of get your your synopsis of the book and where the idea from the book came from.
Sure. Well, let me just say I am so honored that you chose not only this book for your book subscription box, but also The Lunar Housewife. That's so wonderful. Thank
Yeah,
you
I
so
don't
much.
know if I told you that before, so.
No, I don't think so. That's so nice. And it is really an honor to be the October Book Club pick too. I mean, I'm just so excited to be here. So The Mesmerist is historical fiction that's based on a true crime, or at least inspired by a true crime. And it is set in the Bethany Home for Unwed Mothers, which was also a real place. And the basic premise of the book is that there are these 3 women in the Bethany Home for Unwed Mothers. 2 of them are residents. One is on the board. She's the treasurer of the home. And in various ways, the 3 of them become intertwined in this crime, or with a criminal. And it's going to take all 3 of them in their own from their own paths to sort of like solve this mystery, create justice, but also find I think a lot of the book is about like finding home for all 3 of these women, even, Abby, who's 63, and then May and Faith are in their 20s. And especially the younger 2, but all of them in a sense need to like save this place where they live and also find where they belong. So it starts out with Faith arriving at the Bethany Home for Unwed Mothers. She's bedraggled, she has bruises, she's wearing a torn dress, and she will not speak. So that's another piece of it where the other 2 women have to sort of track who Faith is, how she got there, and what she has to do with this criminal at the heart of the story. And then Mesmerism comes in. I could go on.
Well, no, I wanted to ask about Mesmerism,
Sure.
and kind of the popularity of it in that time period. And it's not something you hear of hypnotism, but Mesmerism
Yeah.
is different.
Yeah.
How did you decide to add that into the story? Like, what kind of research did you do?
So the Mesmerism came to the story through Harry T. Hayward. And I can just talk about Hayward, right? And who he was.
Yeah, we all
all
know.
of it.
We all know.
Okay. So Harry T. Hayward was the man who committed this murder that I dramatize in The Mesmerist. And after he killed Kitty King, he was pretty quickly apprehended by the police because he could not help but insert himself in the investigation, as they often do. And everyone around him immediately claimed that they had nothing to do with the crime, or if they did, he had mesmerized them. So right away, as soon as I started looking into this story, I knew that I had to read about mesmerism. And mesmerism originated about 100 years earlier as a system of like medical healing. It was also called animal magnetism, which I had heard a little bit about. There was this Dr. Mesmer in Germany who theorized that the body had these magnetic fluids coursing through it. Human bodies, animal bodies, everything, celestial bodies. And that if someone were powerful enough and magnetic, persuasive enough, they could manipulate the fluids and heal other people. But then it quickly, over time, like in the pop culture, it came to be understood as like a system of mind control, controlling other people. So if you were more magnetic, you could draw others toward you and you could change their thoughts and behaviors. And that was where mesmerism stood in the popular imagination around the time this book takes place in the 1890s. Novels were coming out like The House of the Seven Gables, Trilby by George du Maurier about mesmerists who were like using this skill for sinister means. So Trilby came out the same year that Harry Hayward committed this murder, and it was very much part of the culture in that moment. So people were really primed to believe that he could have manipulated, mesmerized Klaus Blixt to kill someone for him. And then Klaus Blixt, who was actually the triggerman, ended up getting a lighter sentence than Harry Hayward.
Wow.
Because he was thought to have been, he was believed to have been mesmerized. And the other thing I'll say is I've read an explanation of why people in post-Civil War America were so primed to believe in mesmerism, which was the invention of the telephone and the telegraph.
Oh.
So they were, these previously unknown, invisible forms of communication were somehow or suddenly possible. So sure, why not? If I can be in Waco and I can call someone in Chicago and speak to them, why can't someone on the other side of the room wiggle his fingers and then suddenly I'm barking like a dog?
Right. That is fascinating,
Yeah.
especially when you talked about the magnetic personality. Is that where it comes from?
It might be,
I
I'm
was
not
like
sure,
clicked
but
when you said
yeah,
it.
right. A magnetic personality, a persuasive person. It could be.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that really stuck out in the book to both Allison and I, we talked about it today, was this concept brought up at the beginning of the book where the visiting donors point out that the Bethany house is dependent on the brothel industry continuing rather than stopping it completely. We thought that was such an interesting point, trying to even think about other businesses that kind of had that same kind of symbiotic relationship. Did you find anything in your research about that? Was the Bethany House successful in part because the brothels were successful in that area?
Yeah, it was a really interesting and sometimes I think uncomfortable alliance between the Sisterhood of Bethany and the Madams in Minneapolis and the city council, because the Sisterhood of Bethany had pulled off this really feminist thing for that time, which was they convinced the city council to give them 2/3 of the fines that they levied against the madams and the sex workers. And so, yeah, the Bethany Home was very much reliant on the these houses of ill fame continuing to exist and for the city to keep fining them, which was humiliating. It happened once a month. They would round them all up, go in and pay a fine, and then they would go on their merry way. So the city was kind of offering tacit approval of what was going on. It was just like a tax system, basically. And in my research, I came across a lot of like public comments that mayors, city council members were making at the time that indicated that they would publicly call out the Bethany Home for this. And say, like almost like you're a den of vice as well, because you're reliant on others, on other, the sporting houses to survive. But I think the way that the Sisterhood of Bethany would kind of fire back is to say, well, you're not shutting them down. You're allowing this to continue. And as long as you are going to allow it to continue, we need that money because someone needs to take care of the women in this city who are becoming pregnant and have no legal, way of asking for child support, no way of supporting themselves when the wages are so low. Childcare is non-existent. We need to provide this. This is a social safety net, in other words. So, I think they had a really good point. But it was like a tenuous truce. And then a lot of times these Quaker and Presbyterian and Lutheran women who were running the Sisterhood of Bethany were on the very same side as the madams, which was just, I don't know, I just thought it was so interesting.
It is.
That's
Yeah.
really cool. One of the parts I really loved about the book was the ghost story told by Mrs. Rhodes to the girls and how it was directed towards Abby. Why did you make that choice to kind of build have a story and build it as like communication between the characters?
I had that in the plan for a really long time, way, way before I got to that part of the book. I just had it like a placeholder in my outline. Miss Rhodes tells a story, and it's directed at Abby. And I think I knew I needed Miss Rhodes to be kind of a foil to Abby, because Abby means well. She wants to help the women, but sometimes she kind of oversteps her bounds, or she becomes too personally involved with them, too controlling. And she needed a counterbalance. And I thought that would be Miss Rhodes. And then the means of communication, the reason I chose a ghost story is I really liked this notion that the Victorian Americans, would tell ghost stories around Christmas time to feel more cozy, which I thought was really interesting. I mean, the concept of the scary story to be told on Christmas Eve seems kind of foreign to us now, but that was what they loved to do. They would tell the most gruesome, chilling, strange stories on Christmas Eve. And it was explicitly to remind themselves of how like lucky, warm, and secure they were in their like cozy parlors by the fire. So I almost think of the whole book as like an ode to a Victorian ghost story. It ends with Faith telling a scary story to the children, and like there's cold outside and warmth within, to signify that she's kind of landed in that secure place. But so I knew Miss Rhodes would tell a ghost story. But I was kind of avoiding writing it for a long time because I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna say. But then I don't know, it just
I
sort of
loved
worked
it.
out. No, thank you. It's one of my favorite parts of the book, so I'm glad that you're bringing that up. I wrote it on a really hot day in North Carolina at the beach. And maybe the fact that I was so hot and sweaty, like made me really crave like a cold, a stormy November post-Thanksgiving evening in Minnesota. And I was thinking about like, I think I did a little reading of Northern Irish folklore. And I was also thinking about like Snow White and Rose Red, a Grimm's fairy tale type story, but make it a little more sinister. And it just kind of came, it was fun.
Love it.
To write that part.
That's
I feel
awesome.
really seen thinking about these scary stories making you feel warm and cozy. See, it's not just me, Allison.
Maybe that is why. There we go. We finally got down to it.
Yeah, just makes
That's
me
right.
feel warm inside. Yeah,
That's right.
gives me that Christmas spirit.
You're a Victorian at heart.
I am, yes. Well, I think one of the tropes that I love, I don't know if it's a trope or a theme in a book, is women helping women. It just gets me every time. And we had that in spades in this book. And I loved all the personalities of the women. And I feel like you did such a great job showing their camaraderie, but also their conflict, in a very realistic way. So when you are developing a group of characters that need to play off each other, do you have a particular method of story building, or does it just come naturally to you to do that so naturally?
Well, thank you. That I am glad it seems natural. I try to avoid stereotypes about women. It's really important to me not to write like catty women. Women should have conflict like everyone else. No one's ever gonna all get along. But I have two daughters. I try to avoid those stereotypes in all aspects of my life, including when I'm talking to them about their friends or anything. So when I'm writing the women in my books, it is always important to me to write about women helping women, women having conversations that don't always involve like the men in their lives, like about each other. And then, yeah, I mean, I think about like the things that the conflicts that would come up when you share close quarters with someone else, or when you have the same goals, but you really don't agree on the means, to get there, like Abby and Charlotte. Charlotte Van Cleve, I don't know if she was actually like this, but she was another member of the Sisterhood of Bethany, and she was the one who was most famous, gave public talks, relied on that to survive. So in the book, I thought, okay, well, maybe for her, like her reputation is going to be what drives her, and that's going to matter to her more than like for Abby, it's the day-to-day. It's how comfortable are people and what supplies do we need? And did this particular girl run away, and how do I track her down? And Charlotte is looking at the institution as a whole. So I guess what I look at is like what's motivating each character. And sometimes those things are in conflict. And then you can have their styles, not, a style mismatch, or as I said, like a methods mismatch. And I think that comes up between like Abby and Charlotte, and also Faith and May.
That's true. Well, I think I was flipping through the book before I was done and then just spotted the word author's note, which I get always excited about that because I was like, okay, good. And so reading it was really fascinating. Just, I had no idea how many of these characters would be historical figures. And when you mentioned Charlotte Von Cleve, and you talked about feeling a little guilty about portraying her maybe more negatively than she was. Is it difficult? Like, do you wrestle with how far to take a real person's life when you tell a story?
Oh yeah, I definitely do. Yeah, you wonder about this person's living descendants and what they would think. And I
Right.
think as long as you portray them in a generally positive light, it's okay. And it's understood that it is fiction. And I could never claim that any one conversation that they had is going to be accurate. But yeah, I do struggle with that. It's different from totally fictional characters. You can do whatever you want with them.
Right.
And that was one reason. So in The Lunar Housewife, I did take a different tack. And instead of, let's say, writing about the Paris Review, I made up a magazine and gave it like very similar circumstances to the way the Paris Review was funded by the CIA. But I thought, I can't bump anybody off who is actually alive. I can't like make up these romantic relationships for them. So I gave myself more freedom there and brought in the historical figures more as like cameos. Yeah. And in this case, Abby's a real person. And I felt as if I had to not only stay true to the details of her life, but try to get her voice. And fortunately, I could read all her diary, her journals, and all of her correspondence was published by her. She didn't have any children, but I think it was like a nephew or niece or something. So all of her writing is, including her private journals, is available in the public domain. Yeah. So that really helped me write her character, because I was a little intimidated, like who is this person and what business do I have inventing thoughts for this 63-year-old woman who lived over 100 years ago. And then her diary just really made her come alive. Like she was so interesting and kind of funny, sort of self-doubting. She said things like, "Can God tell when I'm being sarcastic?"
That's a good question.
So interesting. Yeah, like there's a lot of personality there.
That's great. So if Abby's relatives read it, you feel like you got who she was from her journals, like an accurate picture?
I think so. I think I did. Yeah. I mean, they're always entitled to their opinion, of course.
Right.
I think I did the best that I could. And it's lucky that I had journals to rely on. Like sometimes you just have biographies or newspaper articles or something like that. And then those are not nearly as personal.
How did you come across the story?
I think I was reading about Jane Addams in Chicago. I wanted to write about Gilded Age women who were helping other women, like to, again, like kind of running against the popular narrative or a stereotype, but what we usually hear about the Gilded Age is like the extreme wealth versus extreme poverty, a lot of sort of selfishness. You read about like parties where the party favors were like diamond encrusted brooches, and meanwhile someone's like begging on the street. I didn't really want to tell that story again, so I was reading about Jane Addams and how she was providing things like pre-K and childcare and prenatal care and postnatal care and English lessons and job training to the working women of Chicago, working families of Chicago, and thought this is great. I didn't see an angle for like a Jane Addams novel, and she's been written about more. And I think it was in a book about a book, or usually I can't remember the original seed of an idea because it's like you just stumble upon it. But I think it was in a book about Jane Addams that it was mentioned. Oh, and the Bethany Home, the sisterhood of Bethany in Minneapolis, and that just started reading about that. And I think I considered having the point of view character be Charlotte Van Cleve, but then I settled on Abby because I just started to realize through like writings about the Bethany Home that were written then, it was usually written by Abby because she was the one there day to day. So it just kind of seemed like, oh, it has to be her. She was the one who did things like sit at the bedside of a young woman who was dying of tuberculosis, or take, Delia was a real person, take her into her own home because she was worried about her. And then the more I read about Abby, just something about her biography grabbed me too, like moving from Cape Cod to Minnesota back when it was really a frontier. And she seemed sort of horrified by the change from Cape Cod to like this logging town that was just, it seemed like muddy and just timber houses and, rutted roads and everything in the beginning. So that was my entry point, I think, for her. But she really did seem like the one who would have been the most emotionally connected with the women in the house, which is what made the most sense for the story.
Yeah, I've heard several people who've just raved about Abby and love her so much. So good job. In your acknowledgments, you dedicate the story to people who have been human trafficked. It's something near and dear to our hearts here in Waco. There's a wonderful ministry here for that. We're, right on a big interstate, actually, one that goes all the way up to Minnesota. Can you talk about why this is so important to you?
Oh, yeah, of course. Well, I think I've just started following like activists, and there's a shelter for women not too far from here. I have friends who are big advocates for against human trafficking, and I feel like it can be something that's sort of misunderstood or like underreported. There is a lot of talk these days about body autonomy and embracing your sexuality and all that stuff, and I think that's all like really great, but I think sometimes it can make like victims of human trafficking sort of hide in plain sight, like things that look empowering may not be so empowering. And so it's just something that I've thought a lot about, and that's Faith's story. Like I made that the story of Faith, and I sort of made the Johnny character. He plays a role that's sort of like the boyfriend trafficker. Like he makes Faith trust him. He makes her think that he's being kind to her, that he even maybe loves her, and then he sort of ends up being the worst character because at least Hayward was mean from the beginning. Johnny is not, and Johnny tricks her into becoming something that he can like sell basically. So that was why I dedicated, I wanted to call attention to the fact that like this is a historical novel, but this kind of thing is still happening all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, I loved reading in your bio that you are teaching fiction as a professor, which I would have loved that as a college student. Do your students read your book? And do you have students who want to be published? Do they consult with you?
Sure. So at the moment, I'm not teaching, but I've done a lot of it. I've taught fiction workshops in Chicago and in Boston. And sometimes they read my work. I don't assign it in class, but I have assigned them other former colleagues and former classmates work, like great short stories and that kind of thing. I do think some of them end up reading my novels. And yeah, we talk about publishing when I teach a writing workshop. And I actually have taught some online workshops that are specifically geared toward getting your work published, because there isn't a ton of information out there.
Right, totally.
And there's not. It can be really hard to navigate, and I like to share my own experience with my students, because um, I think it's encouraging for people to know how long it can take,
Yeah.
that rejection is just part of the game, that you're going to get rejected many, many times by people who seem to be telling you just quit. And you
Yes.
don't, you just don't quit. You have to keep going. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of times it's just a numbers game. But also students seem to need help, like writing the initial letters to agents,
Mhm.
knowing what makes a good agent or how to find one. And then after that, if you get an agent, like how do you navigate then the searching for a publisher process? And how long can that take? That can take a long time too. So yeah, I'm happy. I'm always excited to hear from a former student who then is trying for publication or who gets a book published, because
Oh,
it's
that's
just
so
so
cool.
exciting. I mean, it makes me feel good as a teacher, but also really, really happy for them.
We often have people ask us how to get published, which is hard
Oh,
because we're kind of at the end of the process, so
yeah.
it's difficult to know. Sometimes I can tell you that or I tell them like what kind of books is reading currently, but that can change, in a few months, honestly. So there isn't a lot of information that's true for people who want to publish.
And you probably know things that I have now taken a long time to learn about, like the sales to stores process, and
Yes.
all of that stuff is like, it takes, I feel like even once you become a published author, it takes like 3 books for you to finally be like, oh, this is how it's all done.
That makes sense, definitely. Oh, I have another question.
You
Okay,
do, yeah.
this is one of my favorite questions. If you could cast these characters as actors in a movie, who would be them?
Oh yeah. Okay. Somebody just asked me this. I didn't work. Oh, well, who would my like dream cast be? Um, I thought of Glenn Powell for Harry Hayward, because he's got the like pale blue eyes.
Yes, he would be good. I
He
thought of
has,
Harry Styles for him.
oh, Harry Styles. Oh my God. Yes. I bet they could both have a good
This
mustache.
would be good. That's true.
I think Anna Kendrick for May.
Mm,
Um, honestly, uh, Faith for a little while, I was like, oh, she could be Zendaya. I could
good.
see that, or I could see Dakota Johnson maybe. And
I
then
thought of
Abby,
Florence Pugh for Faith.
oh, Florence
I feel
Pugh would
like
be
she's
cool.
got a real good scowl look.
Yes, she would be able to be really mysterious. Yeah, she would be great.
Yeah.
Um, and then Abby, I mean, like Meryl Streep.
I know. I thought Sally Field because there's
Oh,
like some
Sally
softness
Field.
to her. Like
Yeah,
when she
you're
calls
right.
people friend, which I loved.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. I love
I'm
Sally.
always casting people, with an
So
unlimited budget, apparently, for all these
you
movies.
had Florence Pugh, and then who did you have for May?
I didn't think of May. I feel like she's complex, so I would really, but I think Anna Kendrick is really good too, because she plays a very good every woman,
Yes.
and I think that's something. I mean, everybody can see themselves in May in different ways, so I think that's a good choice.
Yeah, Anna Kendrick gives off an air of having everything organized and taken care of, which I
Yeah.
think where we find May at the beginning of the book, and then the facade really falls apart, and it would be fun
Yes.
to watch Anna Kendrick do that.
I thought
If
Nicole
there's
Kidman could be someone, but
Oh,
I don't know who.
oh, she could be Swede Kate.
She would be good. Yes. This is
So maybe
true.
that's not a big enough part for
That's,
her.
I know, but I mean, with Moulin Rouge, we know that she can play that
Yeah,
type of character for sure.
that's right. Yeah.
This is why Allison asked us questions, because when you said Glenn Powell, I was thinking Glenn Close. And I know he's played
No,
men and women before, and I was like, what? I'm just, yeah.
I love it. You're just smiling. I love it.
I was like, I don't,
You're like, "Mhm."
that's a choice. That's a
That'd be a
choice.
bold
Yeah.
casting choice.
Yeah, Glenn Close can do anything. So,
So funny.
well, what can we expect from you going forward? I'm assuming it'll be one of our next subscription boxes
Oh
at
my
some
gosh,
point.
that would be so great. I'm working on another book about a real life figure. And this time it's set in Chicago in like either the late teens or early 20s. I'm still figuring it out. But it's another historical mystery. There's a true crime involved again. I want this one to be a really, really good, satisfying mystery. And I'm really enjoying the research about Chicago in 1919, 1920. There was so much, there's almost too much going on. Like, how can I fit all of this in? Like the Black Sox scandal and
Wow.
a blimp that burst into flames
Yes.
and crashed through the roof of a building, and there were race riots. There's a lot happening then, and also like the war had just ended, prohibition is starting. So
Yes.
again, I want to avoid like the more well-trodden tales of that time. So it's not going to be an Al Capone story.
I was just going to ask if the mob was going to make an appearance.
I feel like they're only going to be peripherally involved. Like it's crime, but I want it to be a little bit, just a little different. Um, it may involve women who were being sent to asylums.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, I love a good historical mystery, so I will read anything. Send me your early copies because
Oh,
it's like
great.
right in my wheelhouse. True
Awesome.
crime, history,
Mhm.
mystery, just a little dabble of serial killer, all of
Yeah.
it.
A little
Sounds
dash of
delightful.
murder.
Yeah, just a little dash.
Yep.
Love it.
That's awesome. Well, Caroline, this has been so great. Your book is seriously one of my favorites for this year. And we so appreciate you coming and honoring us with your presence and answering our questions.
Thank you so much for all your great questions and for having me and picking this book for your book club. I'm really, really honored, and I can't wait to speak with you again, hopefully for the next book.
Love it.
Definitely. Well, I'm going to let Elizabeth introduce our November book club. This will be on Tuesday, November 19th at 7 p.m.
All right, this is a debut novel called Pierce Oysters by Jocelyn Tekich. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I read this back this summer and it was fantastic. It is about the oyster industry in Louisiana during the BP oil spill, which I was just riveted by that whole story. We have a lot of family on the Gulf Coast and it was devastating. So this was a very, very interesting family drama. And I think even with this horrific season of hurricanes and disruption in this area, it'll be even more timely. So I really, really enjoyed it. And I hope you all do too. And we'll be speaking to the author in November.
Yes. Thank you again, Caroline. We hope to see you again, and maybe your next book, you'll have us on the radar for another book club pick.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you both so much. It was great
Yes.
meeting you.
Yes. Good night.
Thanks,
Good night.
guys.